At some point, people believe that these agents will develop their own language. And that's the point when we don't understand what we're doing. You know what we should do? Pull the plug. Literally unplug the computer. So it's really a problem when agents start to communicate in ways and doing things that we as humans do not understand. That's the limit, in my view.
I'm of the age where some of my friends are getting really dread diseases. Can we fix that now? Can we just eliminate all of those? Why can't we just take these and right now eradicate all of these diseases? That's a pretty good goal. I'm aware of one nonprofit that's trying to identify in the next 2 years all human druggable targets and release it to the scientists. If you know the druggable targets, then the drug industry can begin to work on things. I have another company I'm associated with which has figured out a way, allegedly, it was a startup, to reduce the cost of stage 3 trials by an order of magnitude. As you know, those are the things that ultimately drive the cost structure of drugs. That's an example. I'd like to know where dark energy is, and I'd like to find it. I'm sure that there is an enormous amount of physics in dark energy, dark matter. And think about the revolution in material science. Infinitely more powerful transportation, infinitely more powerful science, and so forth. I'll give you another example. Why do we not have every human being on the planet have their own tutor in their own language to help them learn something new, starting with kindergarten? It's obvious. Why have we not built it? The only possible answer is there must not be a good economic argument. The technology works. Teach them in their language, gamify the learning, bring people to their best natural names. Another example, the vast majority of healthcare in the world is either absent or delivered by the equivalent of nurse practitioners and very, very sort of stressed local village doctors. Why do they not have the doctor assistant that helps them in their language treat whatever with, again, perfect healthcare? I can just go on. There are lots and lots of issues with this world of the digital world. It feels like that we're all in our own ships in the ocean and we're not talking to each other. In our hunger for connectivity and connection, these tools make us lonelier. We've got to fix that, right? But these are fixable problems. They don't require new physics. They don't require new discoveries. We just have to decide. So when I look at this future, I want to be clear that the arrival of this intelligence, both at the AI level, the AGI, which is general intelligence, and then superintelligence, is the most important thing that's going to happen in about 500 years, maybe 1,000 years in human society, and it's happening in our lifetime. So don't screw it up.
The key thing that's going on now is we're moving very quickly through the capability ladder steps. And I think there are roughly 3 things going on now that are going to profoundly change the world very quickly. And when I say very quickly, the cycle is roughly a new model every year to 18 months. The first is basically this question of context window. And for non-technical people, the context window is the prompt that you ask. So, study John F. Kennedy or something. Right. But in fact, that context window can have 1 million words in it. And this year, people are inventing a context window that is infinitely long. And this is very important because it means that you can take the answer from the system and feed it in and ask it another question. So I want a recipe. Let's say I want a recipe to make a drug or something. So they say, what's the first step? And it says, buy these materials. So then you say, okay, I bought these materials. Now what's my next step? And then it says, buy a mixing pan. And then the next step is, how long do I mix it for? You see, it's a recipe. That's called chain of thought reasoning. And it generalizes really well. We should be able, in 5 years, for example, to be able to produce 1,000-step recipes to solve really important problems in science, in medicine, in material science, climate change, that sort of thing. That's the first one.
Let's say we don't screw it up. Let's say we get into this world of radical abundance. Let's say we end up in this place and we hit that point of recursive self-improvement. AI systems take on the vast majority of economically productive tasks. In your mind, what are humans going to do in this future? Like, are we all sipping pina coladas on the beach, like engaging in hobbies?
You tech liberal, you. You must be in favor of UBI. No. Look, humans are unchanged in the midst of this incredible discovery. Do you really think that we're going to get rid of lawyers? No, they're just going to have more sophisticated lawsuits, right? Do you really think we're going to get rid of politicians? No, they'll just have more platforms to mislead you. Sorry.
Oh my God.
I can just go on and on and on. The key thing to understand about this new economics is that we collectively as a society are not having enough humans, right? Look at the reproduction rate in Asia is essentially 1.0 for two parents. This is not good, right? So for the rest of our lives, the key problem is going to get the people who are productive, that is in their productive period of lives, more productive to support old people like me, right, who will be bitching that we want more stuff from the younger people. That's how it's going to work. These tools will radically increase that productivity. There's a study that says that we will, under the set of assumptions around agentic AI and discovery and the scale that I'm describing, which is a lot of assumptions, that you'll end up with something like 30% increase in productivity per year. Having now talked to a bunch of economists, they have no models for what that kind of increase in productivity looks like. We just have never seen it. It didn't occur in any rise of a democracy or a kingdom in our history. It's unbelievable what's going to happen. Hopefully we will get it in the right direction.
Second one is agents. And an agent can be understood as a large language model that knows something new or has learned something. So an example would be read all of chemistry, learn something about chemistry, have a bunch of hypotheses about chemistry, run some tests in a lab about chemistry, and then add that to your agent. These agents are going to be really powerful, and it's reasonable to expect that agents will be, not only will there be a lot of them, and I mean millions, but they'll be like the equivalent of GitHub for agents. There'll be lots and lots of agents running around and available to you. And the third one, which to me is the most profound, which is already beginning to happen, is text to action. And what that is write me a piece of software to do something, right? You just say it. I mean, can you imagine having programmers that actually do what you say you want? And it does it 24 hours a day. And strangely, these systems are good at writing code such as language like Python. You put all that together, and you've got infinite context window, the ability for agents, and then the ability to do this programming. Now, this is very interesting. What then happens? There's a lot of questions here, and now we get into the questions of science fiction. I'm sure the three things I've named are happening because that work is happening now. But at some point, these systems will get powerful enough that you'll be able to take the agents and they'll start to work together, right? So your agent and my agent and her agent and his agent will all combine to solve a new problem.
Incredible. So as we push towards a zenith, autonomy has been a big topic of discussion. Yoshua Bengio gave a compelling talk earlier this week advocating that AI labs should halt the development of agentic AI systems that are capable of taking autonomous action. Yet that is precisely what the next frontier is for all these AI labs and seemingly for yourself too. What is the right decision here?
So Yoshua is a brilliant inventor of much of what we're talking about and a good personal friend, and we've talked about this. And his concerns are very legitimate. The question is not, are his concerns right, but what are the solutions? So let's think about agents. So for purposes of argument, everyone in the audience is an agent. You have an input that's English or whatever language, and you have an output that's English, and you have memory, which is true of all humans. Now, we're all busy working, and all of a sudden, one of you decides it's much more efficient not to use human language, but we'll invent our own computer language.
Uh-oh.
Now, you and I are sitting here watching all of this, and we're saying, like, what do we do now? The correct answer is unplug you, right? Because we're not going to know. We're just not going to know what you're up to. And you might actually be doing something really bad or really amazing. We want to be able to watch. So we need provenance, something you and I have talked about,
yeah.
But we also need to be able to observe it. To me, that's a core requirement. There's a set of criteria that the industry believes are points where you want to metaphorically unplug it. One is where you get recursive self-improvement, which you can't control. Recursive self-improvement is where the computer is off learning and you don't know what it's learning. That can obviously lead to bad outcomes. Another one would be direct access to weapons. Another one would be that the computer systems decide to exfiltrate themselves, to reproduce themselves without our permission. So there's a set of such things. The problem with Yashua's speech with respect to such a brilliant person is stopping things in a globally competitive market doesn't really work. Instead of stopping agentic work, we need to find a way to establish the guardrails, which I know you agree with because we talked about it. Yeah.
You think again how far off in the future is that?
Well, there have been many, many predictions. Clearly, agents and these things will occur in the next few years. And it won't occur in there won't be one day where everybody says, oh my God.
Right.
It's more a question of capabilities every month, every 6 months, and so forth. A reasonable expectation is we'll be in this new world within 5 years,
Wow.
not 10. And the reason is there's so much money. And there are also so many ways in which people are trying to accomplish this. You have the big guys, the 3 large so-called frontier models,
Right.
but you have a very large number of players who are programming at one level lower, at much lower cost, who are iterating very quickly.
Right.
Plus you have a great deal of research. I think there's every reason to think that some version of what I'm saying will occur within 5 years and maybe sooner.
Wow. Now, so you say pull the plug. So 2 questions. So how do you pull the plug? But even before you pull the plug, if you know you're already in chain of thought reasoning and you're headed to what you fear, don't you need to regulate at some point that it doesn't get there? Or is that beyond the scope of regulation?
Well, a group of us have been working very closely with the governments in the West, and we've started talking to the Chinese, which of course is complicated and takes time, about these issues. And at the moment, the governments, with the exception of Europe, which is always kind of slightly confused, have been doing the right thing, which is they've set up trust and safety institutes. They're beginning to learn how to measure things and check things. And the right approach is for the governments to watch us and make sure we don't get confused on what the goal is, right? So as long as the companies are well-run Western companies with shareholders and lawsuits and all that, we'll be fine. There's a great deal of concern in these Western companies about liability, doing bad things. Nobody wants to hurt people. They're not. They don't wake up in the morning saying, let's hurt somebody.
Right.
Now, of course, there's the proliferation problem.
Yeah.
But in terms of the core research, the researchers are trying to be honest.
Okay, so
I think that brings us nicely to the dilemmas, and let's just say there are a lot of them when it comes to this technology. The first one I'd love to start with, Eric, is the exceedingly dual-use nature of this tech, right? It's applicable to both civilian and military applications. So how do you broadly think about the dilemmas and ethical quandaries that come with this tech and how humans deploy them?
In many cases, we already have doctrines about personal responsibility. A simple example, I did a lot of military work and continue to do so. The US military has a rule called 3000.09, generally known as human in the loop, or meaningful human control. You don't want systems that are not under our control. It's a line we can't cross. I think that's correct. I think that the competition between the West, and particularly the United States, and China is going to be defining in this area. And I'll give you some examples. First, the current government has now put in essentially reciprocating 145% tariffs. That has huge implications for the supply chain. We in our industry depend on packaging and components from China that are boring, if you will, but incredibly important. The little packaging and the little glue things and so forth that are part of the computers. If China were to deny access to them, that would be a big deal. We are trying to deny them access to the most advanced chips, which they're super annoyed about. Dr. Kissinger asked Craig and I to do track 2 dialogues with the Chinese, and we're in conversations with them. What's the number one issue they raise? This issue. Indeed, if you look at DeepSeek, which is really impressive, they managed to find algorithms that got around the problems by making them more efficient.
Right.
Because China is doing everything open source, open weights, we immediately got the benefit of their invention and have adopted it into US things. So we're in a situation now, which I think is quite tenuous, where the US is largely driving, for many, many good reasons, largely closed models, largely under very good control. China is likely to be the leader in open source unless something changes, and open source leads to very rapid proliferation around the world. This proliferation is dangerous at the cyber level and the bio level, but let me give you why it's also dangerous in a more significant way, in a nuclear threat way. Dr. Kissinger, who we all worked with very closely, was one of the architects of mutual assured destruction, deterrence, and so forth. And what's happening now is you've got a situation where, I'll use an example. It's easier if I explain. You're the good guy, and I'm the bad guy, okay? You're 6 months ahead of me, and we're both on the same path for superintelligence, and you're going to get there, right? And I'm sure you're going to get there. You know, you're that close, and I'm 6 months behind. Pretty good, right? Sounds pretty good. No, these are network effect businesses. And in network effect businesses, it is the slope of your improvement that determines everything. So I use OpenAI or Gemini. They have 1,000 programmers. They're in the process of creating 1 million AI software programmers. What does that do? First, you don't have to feed them except electricity. So that's good. And they don't quit and things like that. Second, the slope is like this. Well, as we get closer to superintelligence, the slope goes like this. If you get there first, you dastardly person,
You're never going to be able to catch me.
I will not be able to catch you. And I've given you the tools to reinvent the world and in particular, destroy me. That's how my brain, Mr. Evil, is going to think. So what am I going to do? The first thing I'm going to do is try to steal all your code. And you've prevented that because you're good. And you were good. So you're still good at Google. Second, then I'm going to infiltrate you with humans. Well, you've got good protections against that. You know, we don't have spies. So what do? I'm going to go in and I'm going to change your model. I'm going to modify it. I'm going to actually screw you up to get me so I'm one day ahead of you. And you're so good, I can't do that. What's my next choice? Bomb your data center.
Wow.
Now, do you think I'm insane? These conversations are occurring around nuclear opponents today in our world. There are legitimate people saying the only solution to this problem is preemption. Now, I just told you that you, Mr. Good, are about to have the keys to control the entire world, both in terms of economic dominance, innovation, surveillance, whatever it is that you care about. I have to prevent that. We don't have any language in our society. The foreign policy people have not thought about this, and this is coming. When is it coming? Probably 5 years. We have time. We have time for this conversation, and this is really important.
That's the West. So by saying the West, you're implying that proliferation outside the West is where the danger is. The bad guys are out there somewhere.
Well, one of the things that we know, and it's always useful to remind the techno-optimists in my world, there are evil people and they will use your tools to hurt people. My favorite example is that the face recognition stuff was invented not to constrain the Uyghurs. You know, they didn't say, we're going to invent face recognition in order to constrain the minority in China called the Uyghurs, right? But it's happening. All technology is dual use. All of these inventions can be misused. And it's important for the inventors to be honest with that. So in open source, which is, for those of you who don't follow it, open source is where the source code in models, the weights, that is the numbers that have been calculated, are released to the public. Those immediately go throughout the world. And who do they go to? They go to China, of course. They go to Russia. They go to Iran, right? They go to Belarus. They go to North Korea. When I was most recently in China, essentially all of the work I saw started with open source models from the West, which were then amplified. So it sure looks to me like these leading firms, the ones I'm talking about, the ones that are putting $10 billion eventually into this, will be tightly regulated. I worry that the rest will not. You can see, I'll give you another example. Look at this problem of misinformation. I think it's largely unsolvable. And the reason is the code to generate misinformation is essentially free. right?
Right.
Any person, right? A good person, a bad person has access to them. It doesn't cost anything, and they produce very, very good images.
Right.
There are regulatory solutions to that, but the important point is that cat is out of the bag, or whatever metaphor you want. It's important that these more powerful systems, especially as they get closer to general intelligence, have some limits on proliferation. And that problem's not yet solved yet.
Let me push on this a little bit. So if this is true and we can end up in this sort of standoff scenario and sort of the equivalent of mutually assured destruction, you've also said that the US should embrace open source AI, even after China's DeepSeek showed what's possible with a fraction of the compute. But doesn't open sourcing these models just like hand capabilities to adversaries that'll accelerate their own timelines?
This is one of the wickedest, or we call them wicked hard problems. Our industry, our science, everything about the world that we have built is based on academic research, open source, so forth. Much of Google's technology was based on open source. Some of Google's technology is open source, some of it is proprietary, perfectly legitimate. What happens when there's an open source model that is really dangerous and it gets into the hands of the Osama bin Ladens of the world? And we know there are more than one, unfortunately. We don't know. The consensus in the industry right now is the open source models are not quite at the point of national or global danger. But you can see a pattern where they might get there. So a lot will now depend upon the key decisions made in the US and China and in the companies in both places. The reason I focus on the US and China is they're the only two countries where people are crazy enough to spend the billions and billions of dollars that are required to build this new vision. Europe, which would love to do it, doesn't have the capital structure to do it. Most of the other countries, not even India, has the capital structure to do it, although they wish to. Arabs don't have the capital structure to do it, although they're working on it. So this fight, this battle, will be the defining battle. I'm worried about this fight. Dr. Kissinger talked about the likely path to war with China was by accident. And he was a student of World War I. And of course, World War I started with a small event, and it escalated over that summer in, I think, 1914. And then it was this horrific conflagration. You can imagine a series of steps along the lines of what I'm talking about that could lead us to a horrific...
To follow up on your point about the funding, Fei-Fei Li at Stanford argues that's the biggest problem, is that there's so much money going into the private sector. And who's their competition to look at what the red lines are or whatever? It's the universities, which don't have a lot of money. So you really trust these companies to be transparent enough to be regulated by government that doesn't know what they're talking about, really?
The correct answer is always trust but verify.
Yeah.
And the truth is you should trust and you should also verify. And at least in the West, the best way to verify is to use private companies that are set up as verifiers, because they can employ the right people and so forth. So in all of our industry conversations, it's pretty clear that the way it will really work is you'll end up with AI checking AI. It's too hard. Think about it. You build a new model. It's been trained on new data. You've worked really hard on it. How do you know what it knows? Now, you can ask it all the previous questions, but what if it's discovered something completely new and you don't think about it?
Right.
And the systems can't regurgitate everything they know. You have to ask them chunk by chunk by chunk. So it makes perfect sense that an AI would be the only way to police that. People are working on that. With Fei-Fei's argument, she's completely correct. We have the rich private industry companies, and we have the poor universities who have incredible talent. It should be a major national priority in all of the Western countries to get research funding for the hardware. If you were a physicist 50 years ago, you had to move to where the cyclotrons were because they were really hard and expensive. And by the way, they still are really hard and expensive. You need to be near a cyclotron to do your work as a physicist. We never had that in software. Our stuff was capital cheap, not capital expensive. The arrival of heavy-duty training in our industry is a huge economic change. And what's happening is that companies are figuring this out, And the really rich companies, I'm thinking of Microsoft and Google as an example, are planning to spend billions of dollars because they have the cash, they have big businesses, the money's coming in. That's good. Where does the innovation come from? They don't have that kind of hardware, and yet they need access to that.
It's really important that we stick to the values that we have in our society. I am very, very committed to individual freedom. It's very easy for a well-intentioned engineer to build a system which is optimized and restricts your freedom. So it's very important that human freedom be preserved in this. A lot of these are not technical issues, they're really business decisions. It's certainly possible to build a surveillance state, but it's also possible to build one that's freeing. The conundrum that you're describing is because it's now so easy to operate based on misinformation, everyone knows what I'm talking about, that you really do need proof of identity. But proof of identity does not have to include details. So for example, you could have a cryptographic proof that you are a human being, and they could actually be true without anything else, and also not be able to link it to others using various cryptographic techniques.
So zero knowledge proofs and other techniques like
zero knowledge proofs are the most obvious one.
All right.
Okay, let's go to China. So you just, on Kissinger's last trip to China, you went with him, and he had a discussion with Xi Jinping on exactly this set of issues. Your idea was to set up a high-level group to discuss the potential and catastrophic possibilities of AI. Where do the Chinese fit in on this? On the one hand, I've heard you say, and not only you, that we need to go all out to compete with the Chinese for some of the reasons you just said, because there could be bad players or bad intentions. But where is it appropriate to cooperate, and why?
Well, first place, the Chinese should be pretty worried about generative AI. And the reason is that they don't have free speech. And so what do you do when the system generates something that's not permitted in their country? Right? Who do you jail? Right? The computer, the user, the developer, the training data. It's not at all obvious. And the Chinese regulators so far have been relatively intelligent about this, but it's obvious if you think about it that the spread of these things will be highly restricted in China because it fundamentally addresses their information monopoly. That makes sense. So in our conversations with China, both Dr. Kissinger and I, when we were together, and unfortunately he passed away, and the subsequent meetings have been set up as a result of his inspiration to do them, everyone agrees that there's a problem, but we're at the moment with China, we're speaking in generalities. There is not a proposal in front of either side that's actionable, and that's okay, because it's complicated. And a lot of this, because of the stakes involved, it's actually good to take your time to actually explain what you view as the problem. So many Western computer scientists are visiting with their Chinese counterparts and trying to say, if you allow this stuff to proliferate, you could end up with a terrorist act, right? The misuse of these for biological weapons, the misuse of these for cyber. The long-term worry is much more existential, but at the moment, I think the Chinese conversations are largely very constrained by concerns about bio threats and cyber threats. The long-term threat goes something like this. When I talk about AI, I talk about it as human-generated. So you or I give it, at least in theory, a command. And it may be a very long command, and it may be recursive in the sense, but it starts with a human judgment. There is something technically called recursive self-improvement, where the model actually runs on its own, and it just learns and gets smarter and smarter. When that occurs, or when agent-to-agent interaction that's heterogeneous occurs, we have a very different set of threats, which we're not ready to talk to anybody about because we don't understand them. But they're coming.
It is truly unbelievable. Let's bring this home, Eric. You've navigated decades of technological change. For everyone that's navigating this AI transition, technologists, leaders, citizens that are feeling a mix of excitement and anxiety, what is that single piece of wisdom or advice you'd like to offer for navigating this insane moment that we're living through today.
So one thing to remember is that this is a marathon, not a sprint. One year I decided to do a 100-mile bike race, which was a mistake. And the idea was, I learned about spin rate. Every day you get up and you just keep going. You know from our work together at Google that it's when you're growing at the rate that we're growing, you get so much done in a year, you forget how far you went. Humans can't understand that. And we're in this situation where the exponential is moving like this. As this stuff happens quicker, you will forget what was true 2 years ago or 3 years ago. That's the key thing. So my advice to you all is ride the wave, but ride it every day. Don't view it as episodic and something you can end, but understand it and build on it. Each and every one of you has a reason to use this technology. If you're an artist, a teacher, a physician, a business person, a technical person, if you're not using this technology, you're not going to be relevant compared to your peer groups and your competitors and the people who want to be successful. Adopt it and adopt it fast. I have been shocked at how fast these systems, as an aside, my background is enterprise software. And nowadays, there's a model protocol from Anthropic. You can actually connect the model directly into the databases without any of the connectors. I know this sounds nerdy. There's a whole industry there that goes away because you have all this flexibility now. You can just say what you want, and it just produces it. That's an example of a real change in business. There are so many of these things coming every day.
Ladies and gentlemen, Eric Schmidt.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Do you see, I guess I'm trying to think about what a kind of dialogue with the Chinese could mean. Would it be something like nuclear proliferation? I mean, where if they understand the existential threat, to start at that level, maybe an IAEA type of thing for proliferation, do you think that's possible on the political horizon?
It's going to be very difficult to get any actual treaties with China. Mm-hmm. What I'm engaged with is called a Track 2 dialogue, right, which means that it's informal. It's not. It's educational. It's interesting. Right. It's very hard to predict by the time we get to real negotiations between the U.S. and China, yeah, what the political situation will be, what the threat situation, yeah, would be. A simple requirement would be that if you're going to do training for something that's completely new, mm-hmm, you have to tell the other side that you're doing it. So that you don't surprise them.
So it's like the open skies during the Cold War.
So an example would be a no surprises rule. Uh-huh. When a missile is launched anywhere in the world, mm-hmm, all the countries acknowledge that they know it's coming. Right. That way they don't jump to a conclusion and think it's targeted at them. Right. That strikes me as a basic rule, right? Furthermore, that if you're doing powerful training, mm-hmm, there needs to be some agreements around safety. In biology, there's a broadly accepted set of layers, BSL 1 to 4, mm-hmm, right, for biosafety containment, which makes perfect sense because these things are dangerous. Right. Eventually, there will be a small number of extremely powerful computers, mm-hmm, that I want you to think about. They'll be in an army base, and they'll be powered by some nuclear power source in the army base, mm-hmm, and they'll be surrounded by even more barbed wire and machine guns. Right. Because their capability for invention, for power, and so forth exceeds what we want as a nation to give either to our own citizens without permission, as well as to our competitors. It makes sense to me that there will be a few of those, and there'll be a lot of other systems that are more broadly available.
But you're saying that you would notify the Chinese that those systems exist?
Again, it's possible that that would be an answer. Yeah.
And vice versa.
And vice versa. All of these things are mutual. Yeah. But you want to avoid a situation where a runaway agent in China ultimately gets access to a weapon and launches it, right, foolishly thinking that that's some game, because remember, these are not humans. Yeah, they don't, yeah, necessarily understand the consequence. Yeah. These systems are all based on a simple principle of predicting the next word. Yeah. So we're not talking about high intelligence here. Right. We're certainly not talking about the kind of emotional understanding and history that, right, that humans have and, right, human values. Right. So when you're dealing with a non-human intelligence that does not have the benefit of human experience, what bounds do you put on it? And maybe we can come to some agreements on what those are.
Are they moving as exponentially as we are in the West with the billions going into generative AI? Is China have a commensurate billions coming in from government or companies?
It's not at the same level in China for reasons I don't fully understand. My estimate, having now reviewed it at some length, is that they're about 2 years behind. 2 years is not very much, by the way, but they're definitely behind. There are at least 4 companies that are attempting to do large-scale model training, which is similar to what I've been talking about. And they're the obvious big tech companies in China.
Right.
They're hobbled because they don't have access to the very best hardware, which is restricted from export by the Trump and now Biden administrations. Those restrictions are likely to get tougher, not easier. And so as the NVIDIA and their competitor chips go up in value, China will be struggling to stay relevant, right? Because their stuff won't move at the same. Chinese have...
You agree with not letting those chips flow
Well,
to China?
The chips are important because they enable this kind of learning. It's always possible to do it with slower chips. You just need more of them. And so it's effectively a cost tax for Chinese development. That's the way to think about it. And is it ultimately dispositive? Does it mean that China can't get there? No, but it makes it harder and means that it takes them longer to do so.
And we should do that as the West.
Well, the West has agreed to do it. I think it's fine.
Yeah.
It's a fine strategy. I'm much more concerned about the proliferation of open source. And the reason is, and I'm sure the Chinese would have the same concern. So again, these are the kinds of things that we'll be talking to them about, is do you understand that these things can be misused against your government as well as ours?
Right.
So the scenario is open source folks basically do something called basically guardrails. And they fine tune and they use a technology called RLHF to eliminate some of the bad answers. There's plenty of evidence that it's relatively easy. If I gave you all of the weights, all of the stuff, so forth, it'd be relatively easy for you to back them out and see the raw power of the model. And that's a great concern. That problem's not been solved
Reverse
yet.
engineering. Basically.
Yeah, reverse engineering, and that's not been solved yet.